This is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. Um, Most of you will be aware that I've not had very good health for some years now. I've not spoken much about this for some time, but there have been some changes which have been having a major effect on me, on what I've been doing for the past 8 years. Um, I've had similar symptoms going on for several years, but these have got worse, I've noticed, in recent months or weeks. In particular, there's been a major increase in crippling exhaustion as well as problems with memory. I just don't have the energy or the mental energy to do anything for more than short periods of time, and I need to take long rest to recover. In particular, I've noticed that if I was trying to formulate a thought, if there was any sort of interruption to that, if someone said something or whatever, the whole thought process just disappeared in an instant. Just as in a dream I had some weeks ago, someone's hand slipped from my grip as I tried to stop them from falling to their death over a cliff. So this was really about me trying to hold on to a thought as it slipped away from me. So we were concerned enough about this to ring up and get a fairly timely appointment with the psychologist at Wellington Hospital, who had done some testing on me 2 years ago that were indicative but not terribly conclusive. But what he found this time, and he had something to compare with, is that there's been a significant decline over the past 2 years in my ability to remember verbal information, most specifically the ability to get information into my memory. All the other functions, such as the use of language, verbal reasoning and analysis, and executive function, showed little or no change. So this was not a diagnosis, but the results of testing, and could be seen as the beginning of a degeneration condition. Obviously there's a lot more testing that they need to do. So for me, this was a timely confirmation of something that I already knew for myself and was talking about 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it's essentially a kind of a catch-up by the medical system, because over the past 8 years I've been met pretty much by denial from many in the system, and especially those that people that I have to go through to get access to specialists and the like. And I've had considerable difficulty in persuading anybody, any of those people, that there was anything wrong with me. So they all kind of described it as variably as depression or sleep apnea or being overweight or any of those things. And of course they were spectacularly wrong about all of that, and now I'm getting the confirmation that I was right and they were wrong. So that's what I wish to talk about now. I'm sure that there'll be very few people that will have any concern or interest in any of this, but those who have been inflicted by undiagnosed chronic and degenerative conditions will recognize this immediately. I'm making this video because I want to tell my story, even if you want to actually hear it, because I don't know how long I will be capable of doing so. So first, here a general background. This is an excerpt from a video I made 3 to 4 years ago, and I would not depart from this version of events one little bit, and then we'll take it from there. Yeah, I've just been reflecting on things the last 60 years, which have been marked largely by indifferent health. But when I think back, really, for the first 30 years, I was pretty unconscious and I was of no use to anybody, really. And then in the next 10 years, I spent intensively in self-development. I spent it doing yoga, making the body more supple, and took up meditation and Buddhist practice, and really, I really learnt the skills that I needed for self-reflection. So that has allowed the last 20 years of my life to actually have something to be able to give something back to the wider community. Um, Going back 20 or 25 years ago, I was a pretty adept yoga practitioner and teacher, and I think I was a pretty popular one. I really had something to give back to people. But at a certain stage, I noticed that I couldn't sort of sit between my heels. Start getting cramp. Uh, I couldn't sort of stretch. It felt unpleasant. I know exactly what sort of the sweet pain associated with yoga feels like, and this felt like something was completely wrong. Well, that was probably 20 years ago. Uh, so that was really the start of it. I started off my acupuncture training that I trained for 4 years, just as an acupuncturist and as a Chinese herbalist. Then I started getting interested in muscle testing and did a course in something called NAET, Nambu allergy elimination technique, and I brought this back, and it really kind of reached a niche that was needed at the time. And I started to get a reputation by treating people with chronic conditions, by treating them as allergies. And I would say that I helped the bulk of people who came to me and persevered with it for a while. Um, so, and kind of going through my own kind of health crisis, it began to be a real demand on me from people, people who were really sick and who depended on me. And I think just increasingly it took more and more of a toll on me. And I was practicing this quite intensively um, for about, for a total of 10 years anyway. And all of this came to a full stop when I had an accident off my horse, Biscuit. So my time out with Biscuit and horse riding, and I was never a very kind of adept rider, was more about the sort of developing the communication and a rapport with the horse than anything else. It really gave me an outlet through all of these years Anyway, one day I'd bought a new saddle, a new Western saddle. It was second hand, and I'd taken it up to have it checked by a saddler and got the all clear. And then I was preparing for a major trek. This would have been just the greatest thing of my whole riding career, and I've been able to do it. Anyway, I took Biscuit out to test a new pair of boots for him, and we were riding over the farm and going up a particularly steep bit of country, and I must have kind of leaned out to the left, and basically uh, the girth or whatever the equivalent on a Western saddle snapped, and I was catapulted out of the saddle, ended up on the ground, and I realized within a moment that I had a broken bone, broken arm, and came down and managed to retrieve Biscuit, and we both walked down together, and it was all fine until I saw my first human being, and then the adrenaline wore off and the pain set in. Anyway, there was something about this broken bone. It's the first and only time I've ever broken a bone in my life. But I know I have an inkling of what the pain should be. But the next kind of 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it was, I spent a lot of time just resting in bed, and there was something extra that was really, really wrong, um, that I could feel, some sort of trauma, which then triggered something that became chronic or became more serious than what was already there before. Anyway, once the plaster came off, I had some very extraordinary symptoms that I could never explain to anybody. It was more a type of discomfort than a pain. And then my ankle started swelling up. I got edema, and it was just before Christmas, and we were just ready to finish up for the year. And then I went to see my doctor, Mark Austin, who had not only been my doctor, but he had been my colleague for the 10 years that I was working at the Manuka Health Centre. Anyway, he took one look at my ankles, and he sent me straight off to hospital. And basically, I had a very long session in the hospital. I had someone who really wasn't going to let go until he found some sort of diagnosis. And he came up with something, a chronic condition. It's a kind of autoimmune disease that affects the lungs, called sarcoidosis. And I was put on a pretty heavy-duty dose of prednisone. Continuing my description of all of this, I have to go back a stage or two, because I spent 10 years working with the Manuka Health Centre. Yeah, I had my own sort of practice in Petone, and I wrote a letter to Mark Austin, and I was kind of summoned, and he was setting up this medical centre, and he had this sort of self-proclaimed idea of everybody working together, you know, in a sort of integrated medicine centre. But of course, that never ever came about. I should have seen the writing on the wall from the very beginning. The one thing I remember about Dr. Mark Austin is a kind of lack of sociability, a sort of sneer on his face. Someone who I sort of got on with. I thought that I was a colleague. We worked in the same centre, so we were colleagues for for 10 years. So I certainly didn't do the centre any harm. So the reaction that I got from Mark Austin, I mean, he was actually very good in that he referred me urgently to the hospital with the edema in my ankles, but the subsequent reaction was just absolutely dreadful. So I had these x-rays of the lungs showing some damage, and then I was put onto prednisone, and then subsequent tests showed an improvement in inflammation markers and an improvement in the situation while I was throughout my symptoms got worse. And I never ever believed in prednisone. Sorry, not in well, I certainly didn't believe in prednisone. I didn't believe in sarcoidosis as a diagnosis, and I think that I was born. That was all been borne out by the fact that nobody even mentions it. In fact, it seemed to disappear off my files. Yeah, so I had a terribly bruising time with Dr. Austin. Yeah, some of the details of what happened, which led me to leave my practice at the Manuka Health Centre, is a little bit hazy, but not the feeling. If you can imagine that you're as worried as hell, and you have blood tests and you want to have other tests, and then you get summons down to the doctor's office and you think that there's something untoward has come out through the through the blood tests, but not a bit of it. All he wanted to do was bail me out for criticising him. So I'm just going to kind of read this, and this will this is a letter that I wrote to Mark Austin after all of this. This is my resignation letter. So I'm just going to read this. I feel the need to write in order to clear the air. I realise that it was always a mistake to register with you, that is Mark Austin, as a general practitioner, as this may have blurred the doctor-patient relationship. I came to see you as a patient because I had been feeling very unwell for some time now and was seeking help and specifically a diagnosis. I felt for the most part that I have not been taken seriously and not fully listened to, and more importantly treated in a way that seemed disrespectful and even, I feel, disdainful. I've been hurt beyond measure by your attitude of the past few months, and the last straw was your last email. And I've lost a copy of that email, but I've got a quote here. He's saying, I'm increasingly concerned about your memory or your interpretation of our conversations. Well, I certainly didn't have any trouble with my memory back then, I can tell you. I feel that you've written things as a medical professional that should not be spoken, and I think you've gone outside any standards of good professional conduct by being insensitive, by splitting hairs and misconstruing what I had to say. Some time ago, I was feeling very low and was slightly apprehensive about the results of blood tests that you had ordered. I wrote an email to you to clarify how I felt. Viz, I'm going to have one last attempt to get you to hear what I'm saying to you from the beginning. It was hurtful and humiliating to be ordered into your office when I was apprehensive, scared shitless actually, about blood tests results that were never communicated to me, to face demands that I, as your patient, justify myself as to what I had written to you. I recall you even said you wouldn't let me leave until I had answered you. That conversation stepped right over the bounds of what was acceptable from a professional and caused me great anguish. Harking back to the email in question, I have to this day a very clear memory of what was said in our last session. And if you want to split hairs about this, I would suggest this reveals something about you. Since our last conversation, in fact, two sources have told me that ultrasound is practically useless as a way of identifying pancreatic cancer, because that's what he referred me for, unless it is in its very last stages. Both have canvassed the use of cancer antigen blood tests as an initial indicator. As it is, my concerns have been largely allayed by going to another GP. Going to another GP who has been able to speak honestly, listen respectfully, and refer me to appropriate tests, as well as offer a course of treatment that may or may not prove to be successful in the longer term. And then I said, partially as a result of declining health, but largely because it is stressful to work in the same place as you, I have decided to withdraw from the Manuka Health Centre forthwith. Well, I spent the whole of yesterday trying to put this video together, and I lost absolutely everything. All the files were corrupted. None of my applications used for editing this stuff worked. And finally, I had to do an escape to get out of the computer at the end of the day. When I came back, the very app that I was using all day is missing. It's completely gone, as if it has never existed. And the previous thing that I couldn't, more up-to-date version that I couldn't get to work, it's completely and spontaneously changed its form. So I've had to sort of simplify this and divide it into two to make it possible for me to even get this together. So there's a part 2 coming up, and don't miss it, because there's even better stuff coming.